I always thought living far from people meant I was safer. Fewer neighbors, fewer problems. That night taught me how wrong I was, because whoever surrounded my house knew exactly where I lived, and exactly when I was alone. I'm in my early 30s, and I live alone in a small house out in the countryside. The nearest homes are far enough away that you can't see them from my windows, and there are no sidewalks or streetlights anywhere near my property. It's quiet, usually the kind of quiet people dream about. That night started completely normal. I had the day off and spent it at home, doing nothing out of the ordinary. By the time evening rolled around, I headed upstairs, got ready for bed, and climbed under the covers. I was scrolling through videos on my phone, half distracted, trying to fall asleep. That's when I heard something that made me pause the video. At first, it was barely noticeable. Voices, low, muffled, coming from outside. It sounded like at least two people, maybe more, talking quietly, like they were trying not to be heard. And that alone immediately felt wrong. No one ever walked near my house at night. Anyone that close had to know exactly where they were. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. I couldn't make out words, so I slowly stood and stepped toward the window. The moment I got close, the voices stopped completely. Every muscle in my body tensed. Whoever was outside had just gone silent the second I moved. I stared into the darkness, but all I could see was my yard swallowed by shadows. Trees, empty space, nothing moving. But the thought that multiple people might be standing out there, watching my window, made my skin crawl. I backed away quickly. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they didn't realize they were on private property. Maybe they'd leave once they noticed the house. But then another thought hit me. If that were true, why hadn't they left already? Why did it feel like they were getting closer? After waiting a few minutes, I approached the window again. Still nothing. I went downstairs and checked every window on the first floor, scanning the darkness from different angles. I didn't see anyone, and that somehow made it worse. Not knowing where they were was far more terrifying than seeing them. About half an hour after I first heard the voices, I made a decision I immediately regretted. I turned on the porch light, unlocked the front door, and stepped outside. The air was cold and still. I took a few steps away from the doorway and listened. All I heard was the wind and distant insects. Beyond the glow of the porch light, everything dissolved into blackness. I couldn't even make out the shapes of trees. That's when the feeling hit me. A sudden, overwhelming sense that I was being watched. My eyes darted around uncontrollably. My chest tightened. It felt like there were multiple sets of eyes locked onto me from somewhere just outside the light. I didn't wait to confirm it. I rushed back inside, locked the door, and stood there for a moment, breathing hard. The feeling faded almost immediately, which made me wonder if it had all been in my head. Trying to calm myself down, I grabbed a glass of water, went back upstairs, and eventually crawled into bed again. It took a while, but I finally fell asleep. Hours later, I was jolted awake by a violent crashing sound in the hallway. I bolted upright and ran to my bedroom door, heart hammering. When I opened it, shards of glass were scattered across the floor. A rock had been thrown straight through the hallway window at the back of the house. Before I could even fully process that, the voices came back, louder now. Multiple people shouting instructions to each other. Then came the slamming. Heavy impacts against the front door. The entire house shook. More glass shattered as windows were broken one after another. I retreated into my bedroom, locked the door, and called 911. While I was still on the line, I heard the sound that made my blood turn cold. The front door breaking open. Footsteps rushed inside. Several people, running through the house, laughing. The operator told me officers were only minutes away, but I knew I didn't have that kind of time. If they wanted in my room, the door wouldn't hold. I went to the window. Because of the sloped ceiling of the house, the window opened directly onto the roof. It was dangerous. Absolutely not something you were meant to do. but staying inside felt worse. I climbed out onto the roof, shut the window behind me, and crawled upward, pressing myself flat against the shingles. Less than a minute later, fists slammed against my bedroom door. Some of them shouted for me to open up. A couple even used friendly, joking voices. It was horrifying. The door didn't last long. I could hear them moving through the room below me, then spreading through the upper floor, checking every space. They stayed inside until distant sirens began cutting through the night. Only then did they run. I stayed on the roof until police arrived and helped me down. My house was destroyed, but nothing had been stolen, which meant they weren't there for my things. They were there for me. The living room opened up into two directions. The kitchen was to my left, and straight ahead were the large front windows of the house. I almost always kept the curtains shut at night. Living out in the countryside had taught me that privacy wasn't optional. While the movie played, I started noticing something strange. Every so often, I thought I saw movement through the small gap between the curtains. Just a flicker, a shadow shifting where nothing should have been. Each time I turned my head, there was nothing there. At first, I brushed it off. Then it happened again, and again. By the fifth or sixth time, my curiosity outweighed my nerves. I stood up and walked over to the window, fully expecting to confirm that I was imagining things. I pulled the curtains apart. Immediately, I saw someone outside. Not right up against the glass like I'd expected, but standing out in the road in front of my house. He was clearly an adult, maybe in his 30s, wearing a dark Halloween costume that blended almost perfectly into the night. He wasn't standing still. He wandered back and forth across the street, stepping onto the shoulder, then turning around and crossing back again. His movements were sloppy and uncoordinated, like someone who'd had way too much to drink. I checked the time. It was just after 1 in the morning. My first thought was that he was drunk, probably walking home from a party. Honestly, if I had to bet, I would have put money on it. He didn't look threatening, and he definitely didn't seem close enough to be what I'd been seeing near the window earlier. I closed the curtains and went back to the couch. Even with them fully shut, there was still that thin gap between the panels. But nothing moved after that. If anything, the sudden stop made me uneasy. Whatever I'd been seeing before was gone. About 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. I froze. My eyes locked onto the door, and my heart began to pound. It had to be the guy from the street. There was no one else it could be. But why was he at my door now? I stayed seated, hoping he'd knock once and leave. He didn't. The knock came again. This time, I got up and walked over slowly, keeping my distance. I leaned in and looked through the peephole. It was him. Same costume, same man. But something was wrong. He wasn't swaying. He wasn't stumbling. He stood perfectly still, facing the door. Even through the peephole, I could see his eyes, wide open, fixed directly on the handle, waiting. A chill ran through me. If he was drunk, there was no way he could stand that still. And if he wasn't drunk, that was far worse. I started considering calling the police right then. Before I made up my mind, he stepped away from the door. I watched as he walked down the sidewalk, disappearing into the darkness, like whatever he came for had been decided. I sat back down, trying to convince myself it was over. The next few hours passed quietly. I poured myself a glass of wine, hoping it would help me relax enough to sleep. I knew lying in bed would just mean staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. I stayed on the couch, scrolling through my phone. That's when I heard it. A dull tapping sound. It wasn't coming from the front of the house. It was deeper inside. I stood up, moving slowly toward the sound, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. Tap, tap, tap. I stepped into the hallway, then into the family room. That's when I saw it. A shadow, cast against the far window. A man stood just outside the glass, tapping something lightly against it. I couldn't see his face. I couldn't see what he was holding. only the shape of his arm moving rhythmically. I didn't hesitate. I ran back to the living room and called 911. The tapping didn't stop. Even as I spoke to the operator, I could still hear it. Slow, deliberate, almost patient. Once officers were dispatched, I forced myself to look again, hoping to confirm it was the same man from earlier. He must have seen me. The tapping stopped. He stood there for a moment, completely still, and then walked away into the darkness. Police arrived and searched the area, taking my statement and the description I gave them. They didn't find anyone that night. 2 weeks later, I found out someone a few streets over had called in a nearly identical report. A man watching their house, behaving strangely, vanishing before police arrived. I'm almost certain it was the same person, and I still catch myself wondering what would have happened if I'd opened the door when he was standing there, waiting. After getting home that night, I went straight to my bedroom where my gaming setup was. The plan was simple: stay up late and game with my friends online. They all worked late shifts too, so I expected them to be slow getting on. I finished eating at my desk and launched a game to kill time while I waited. Partway through a match, my phone started ringing. I glanced at it, assuming it was one of the guys calling through a different app. Instead, it was an unknown number. I ignored it. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. Same number. That caught my attention. Scam calls usually don't do that. Not back-to-back like that, and definitely not from the same number. I declined it, but almost immediately the phone rang a third time. At that point, I figured it had to be someone messing with me. I answered but stayed silent, waiting for them to talk first. Several seconds passed. Nothing. I finally said hello. Still nothing. But I could hear wind on the other end. Someone was definitely there. I hung up, feeling uneasy. A few minutes later, my friends finally got online. The first thing I did was ask if one of them had been calling me. They joked about it for a second, but it was obvious they had no idea what I was talking about. We laughed it off and started gaming. Strangely, the calls stopped the moment I was on voice chat. Hours passed, and the whole thing slipped to the back of my mind. Around 2 a.m, we decided to call it a night. After we disconnected, I stayed at my desk for a moment, stretching and scrolling on my phone. That's when it vibrated. A text message. Before I even unlocked the screen, I saw it was from the same unknown number, and it wasn't just a message. It was an image. I opened it. My stomach dropped. It was a photo of me sitting at my desk, headset on, hands on the keyboard. The picture had been taken from behind me. Recently. Way too recently. I spun around instantly. There was no one there. The only thing that gave me a fraction of relief was the window behind my desk. If the photo was taken from outside, then at least whoever did this wasn't already inside my room. I rushed to the window and looked out. Nothing. No movement. No shapes. I checked the lock, pulled the blinds shut, and stepped back. My hands were shaking as I stared at the photo again. This wasn't a prank. I saved the image and sent it to my friends' group chat, desperately hoping one of them would admit it was a joke. None of them did. This time, there was no laughing. They all told me the same thing: call the police or get out of the house. My heart was pounding as I cracked my bedroom door open and listened. The house was silent. For some reason, I felt the urge to check the rest of the house before calling for help, just to make sure I wasn't already in immediate danger. I stepped into the hallway and moved slowly forward. I barely made it around the corner. The front door was wide open. I don't know how I knew, but I suddenly felt it. Someone was still there. Somewhere close. I turned and sprinted back into my room, slamming the door and locking it. Almost immediately, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Slow, controlled. They stopped right outside my door. There was a knock. Then I saw the handle move slightly. He knocked again. Still no words. Not a sound beyond that. I started calling the police, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Before I could even explain what was happening, the footsteps moved away. Just like that, he was gone. Police arrived shortly after and searched the house, but there was no sign of anyone. The number that called and texted me turned out to be a burner phone. No name, no trace. I never saw his face. I never learned who he was. And that's the part that still messes with me the most, because nothing is stopping him from coming back, or from deciding to do something worse next time.